Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some malicious compliance stories. Today we've got 3 tales of people who thought they could take what wasn't theirs, ignore warnings, and treat others like servants. One involves a stepmother who barred her stepson from his father's house for 28 years, another a group of diners who tried to dodge a banquet deposit and stiff their servers, and the last a new hire who ignored a safety warning because he couldn't stand taking orders from the boss's kid. Here we go. My stepmother barred me from my dad's house for 28 years. My husband is 47 now, but this story really starts when he was 19. His father passed away from cancer, and it wasn't sudden. He knew it was coming, so he revised his will carefully. The document was complicated but deliberate. The house his father owned was left to both his wife at the time and my husband. However, his wife was allowed to live in the house as the sole resident until she either passed away or voluntarily moved out. After that, full ownership would transfer entirely to my husband. She could not will it to her own children or anyone else. Essentially, she had lifetime occupancy, but not ultimate control. The reason behind the arrangement wasn't sentimental. My father-in-law had a rocky relationship with his ex-wife, my husband's mother, and he didn't particularly care for his stepchildren either. He wanted to make sure that if he passed while my husband was still under 18, neither his ex-wife nor his stepchildren would end up controlling the house, so he crafted a will that protected his son in the long term, even if it meant tying the property up for decades. When he died, the stepmother wasted no time showing where her loyalties lay. She bagged up a few of my husband's belongings, literal garbage bags, and left them on the porch. She wouldn't let him inside his own father's home. He asked for his television, family photos, his video games, even childhood toys. She refused. According to him, her final words to him were, "The TV stays." That was 28 years ago. They never spoke again. At the beginning of this year, she passed away at 81. Her daughter, who's in her 60s, immediately tried to claim half the house. She consulted lawyers and was told flatly she had no legal claim. The will was airtight. The house belonged to my husband outright upon his stepmother's death. That did not sit well with her. My husband has tried to remain civil. Despite everything, it was still her mother. However, shortly after her passing, we received a call from the insurance company. His stepmother had a life insurance policy with no named beneficiary. Because of how the estate was structured and because of the surviving legal ties, my husband's entitled to half of the payout. We don't yet know the exact amount, but it's not insignificant. His stepsister is livid. She insists the policy was her mother's and that my husband should collect his half and hand it over to her. She claims it's the right thing to do. He's torn. Legally, the money is his. Morally, he's wrestling with the fact that his stepmother hated him. She kept his father's life insurance payout when his father died. She kept his belongings. She barred him from the house. She never reached out, never softened, never attempted reconciliation, and yet here we are, decades later, being asked to be generous to her memory. After speaking with the insurance representative, the situation became clearer. The policy had actually been taken out by his father and stepmother together after they married. It was meant to cover all of their children, not just hers. The way his stepsister framed it made it sound like this was exclusively her mother's private policy. That turned out to be misleading at best. That changed the whole math. His dad paid into that policy too. It wasn't just hers, so the money was always meant to be shared. His stepsister just hoped he wouldn't ask questions. That conversation changed everything for my husband. If Dad paid into it too, he said quietly afterward, then it was meant for me as well. The guilt shifted into something else, something steadier. He decided he would keep his half. The house situation has been far messier. His stepsister and her husband were still living there when we first contacted them about vacating. We spoke to a lawyer who explained that under state law, we can issue a 30-day written notice to vacate. If they damage the property, we can pursue legal action for waste. We hoped it wouldn't come to that. They delayed, claiming illness. We gave them the benefit of the doubt for a short period. Eventually, we got access to the house. It was worse than either of us expected. There's a leak in the roof over the sitting room. At some point, when his stepmother could no longer manage the stairs, someone installed a full shower in the middle of a downstairs living room. Not a bathroom conversion, not a remodel, a literal shower stall in what used to be a sitting area. And then there were the cockroaches. The infestation was obvious within minutes. When we left that day, I showered twice. My husband barely spoke on the drive home. This was Dad's house, he kept saying. He built this. The lawyer explained that what we're seeing qualifies as waste. His stepmother was obligated to maintain the home in reasonable repair and not make substantial structural changes. Unfortunately, since she passed with no meaningful assets, there's little to recover even if we pursued a claim. We'd likely spend more on legal fees than we'd ever see returned. His stepsister has until the end of May to vacate. We've made it clear that any further damage will be documented. If necessary, we'll enforce the law. My husband's also made it clear that he's keeping every dollar of the insurance money owed to him. Given the roof repairs, pest control, demolition of the improvised shower, and general restoration, we're going to need it. Emotionally, this has hardened something in him. He doesn't want further contact with her family after this. Seeing his father's home deteriorate like that cut deeper than the life insurance argument ever could. There was one bright moment, though. While going through some drawers and old storage boxes, he found photographs of his dad and copies of his military service records tucked away. They'd been overlooked. We brought them home. Tonight, he's sitting at the kitchen table flipping through those photos, telling me stories I've never heard before. There's work ahead, months of repairs, probably years before the place feels right again, but at least now it's his. Fully, finally, his. And if anyone thinks he owes more than that, they can feel free to renovate a cockroach-infested living room shower on their own dime. And our second story. I had a front row seat to 25 entitled adults who couldn't handle separate tables and thought servers should read minds. When I was a teenager, I bussed tables at what we proudly called the semi-nice steakhouse in our small Midwestern town. It wasn't fine dining by big city standards, but for us, it was the place you went for anniversaries, prom dinners, and business meetings where someone wore a tie. Because of that, a lot of customers came in acting like they were dining at a five-star establishment. In reality, most of us knew exactly who they were, what their kids' names were, and which church they attended. One afternoon, about 30 minutes before opening, the phone rang. A woman asked if we could seat a party of 25 right at opening. My manager, who had all the patience of a saint but the backbone of a brick wall, said no. We weren't staffed for that many without notice, but we could seat 12 at two separate round tables in the main dining room. The caller agreed without hesitation. That should have been our first clue. We set up two round tables near the center of the dining room, each capable of holding 6 people comfortably. When the group of 12 arrived right at opening, they immediately began complaining about the tables being separate. "Can't you just push them together?" one man asked, gesturing dramatically. "They're fixed round tables," my manager explained calmly. "They can't be moved." They muttered among themselves, but eventually sat down. We all assumed that was the end of it. It was not. Over the next 15 minutes, more people from the same group began trickling in. First 2, then 1, then 3 more. Singles and couples arrived as if they were casually dropping by, but it was obvious this had been coordinated. Within 20 minutes, 13 additional people were standing at the host stand, insisting they were part of the original party. My manager pinched the bridge of her nose, but managed to find additional seating in the same dining room. They were not at the same tables, and they were not directly next to each other, but they were in the same space. For most rational adults, that would have sufficed. Not this crew. They began complaining loudly about being split up. "We're one group," one woman insisted, as if proximity laws could be bent by sheer volume. They demanded the same server for all 25 people, even though they'd arrived in waves and were seated across multiple sections. They also insisted all of their food come out at the exact same time. The servers were already scrambling. Taking orders was a nightmare because the group kept switching seats. One minute, a man in a blue shirt would order a ribeye medium rare, and the next minute he'd be sitting 3 chairs down while someone else took his seat. When the food started coming out, chaos followed. "That's not mine," someone would bark, even though it absolutely was 10 minutes earlier. Servers had to repeatedly confirm who ordered what because the seating chart they'd painstakingly created was useless. Meanwhile, the main group continued to complain to my manager that their appetizers weren't synchronized with the people who had arrived late. Then came the checks. Some people wanted separate bills, others wanted to split items across tables. A few decided they would pay for someone sitting at an entirely different table with a different server. Our system couldn't combine checks across sections without managerial override, and even then it was messy. "This is ridiculous," one man said loudly when told we couldn't split his friend's steak between two checks handled by different servers. "You need better systems." The irony was rich, considering they were the ones who'd engineered the logistical nightmare. Because they'd deliberately broken themselves into smaller groups, none of the tables met the automatic gratuity threshold. That meant tipping was entirely voluntary. After 2 hours of seat switching, yelling over each other, and blaming servers for timing issues they themselves created, several of the servers walked away with zero tip. I remember one of the servers coming into the back, eyes glassy with frustration. "They stiffed me," she said flatly. "All that work. Nothing." Meanwhile, the self-appointed ringleaders were complaining to the manager about the poor coordination and subpar experience. During one particularly heated exchange, a woman announced that they had reserved our banquet room for the following evening and were shocked at how they were being treated. That's when it clicked. We had 2 banquet rooms. One was for truly large parties, the other accommodated 15 to 30 guests. Both required a deposit, and it wasn't pocket change. You paid to guarantee space and dedicated service. Judging by the smug tone in her voice, they believed that because they had booked a banquet room for the next day, we should treat their impromptu 25-person ambush like a private event without the associated fee. They had clearly tried to game the system. Call ahead for 12, show up with 25, avoid the deposit, expect red carpet treatment anyway. When they finally left, the dining room felt like it had survived a natural disaster. Crumpled napkins littered the tables, chairs were scattered out of place, servers were exhausted and underpaid for the ordeal. The next evening, they showed up for their actual banquet reservation. The deposit had been secured, the room was set, everything was orderly. They were noticeably less theatrical, perhaps because they no longer had plausible deniability about being one coordinated group. My manager, cool as ever, greeted them with a polite smile and simple "Good evening, we're prepared for 25." No one tried to sneak in extra guests that night. No one switched seats every 5 minutes. And somehow, miraculously, their food managed to come out in waves appropriate for a group of that size. Funny how the second night went smoothly, almost like the problem wasn't the restaurant systems but their own behavior. Deposit paid, rules followed, everything worked. Who knew? Working there taught me a lot about small-town entitlement. People love to flex status in places where everyone already knows their business. The thing about a small town is that reputations stick, word travels, servers talk, managers remember. If you think you can outsmart a steakhouse to dodge a banquet deposit, you might want to make sure the staff doesn't recognize your voice when you call 30 minutes before opening. And our last story. My new hire ignored my safety warning because I'm the boss's kid who couldn't hack college. For context, my father owns a telecommunications repair company. Before starting his own business, he worked in the industry for years, climbing towers, welding mounts, rigging antennas, and doing all the gritty jobs most people don't even think about when they use their phones. I hated daycare as a kid, so every summer I was with him on job sites instead. By the time I was a teenager, I could weld clean beads, rig cell phone tower antennas, and handle winches without supervision. I tried college for a year and hated that too. At 19, I dropped out, got my certifications, and asked my dad for a job. He didn't hand me anything. I started at the bottom like everyone else, and over time, I earned my place. When he landed a massive contract with a major client, he hired 5 new guys and put me and another veteran tech in charge as crew leads. That's when I met Darren. 40 years old, fired from multiple physical therapy clinics, and apparently convinced the trades were beneath him. He had a bachelor's degree and mentioned it constantly, like it was a magic shield against incompetence. According to him, the only reason I was there was because I was the boss's kid who couldn't make it in the real world. First site, first job of the day, and we were swapping out old antennas for new ones on a 700-foot tower. The other crew lead realized he'd left his hard hat at the hotel and said he'd be back in half an hour. No big deal. It was a simple rigging setup I'd done dozens of times. I dropped off the lunch in the refrigerated server shelter and walked over to Darren. He was using a trailer hitch-mounted winch to haul a brand new antenna up the tower. Our guys were 700 feet up waiting to receive it. The antenna was already about 150 feet in the air. I watched for about 5 seconds before my stomach dropped. "Hey, Darren," I called out, "your fasteners are backwards." "They're fine," he snapped without looking at me. "No, they're definitely backwards," I said, stepping closer. "Once that antenna gets higher and the wind catches it, the tension's going to increase and that winch is going to slip." He turned to glare at me. "They're effing fine. Go the F away, bootlicker." I ignored that. "Bring it down and fix it." "I don't have to do crap for someone half my age who couldn't make it through a year of college," he shot back. "Only reason you're here is because you're daddy's kid." Right as he finished that sentence, I heard it. A sharp metallic crack, the kind of sound you don't forget. I didn't argue. I grabbed him by the collar and bolted toward the server shelter, shoving both of us inside. The winch tore out of the hitch mount like it had been fired from a cannon. The antenna dropped straight down, smashed through the cab of the truck, and buried itself in the dirt underneath. $70,000 in our equipment, $30,000 in the client's. We both stood there staring through the doorway. F, I muttered. Then I looked at him. "So not only did you rig it wrong, you didn't even put the pin in to secure the winch to the hitch?" "There's no way that was my fault," he said, pale but still defiant. "It's absolutely your fault," I replied, "and now I get to explain to OSHA, our insurance, and the client how we managed to destroy over $100,000 on day one." He called you a bootlicker and daddy's kid, ignored your warning, and then watched $100,000 crash through a truck because he couldn't admit someone half his age knew more about rigging? That's not a safety incident. That's a math problem where ego was the variable he forgot to calculate. The rest of my day was paperwork and damage control. I called OSHA, filed incident reports, looped in our insurance, and updated my dad. I called my mom, who handles accounting, so she could prepare for the financial fallout. I reassured the rest of the crew that their paychecks weren't in danger and promised them replacement sandwiches since ours were now crushed under my elbows from the sprint to safety. That evening, my dad called me. "Fire him," he said flatly. "Negligence. You warned him." So I walked over to Darren. "You're being let go," I said. "This incident is too serious. We can't afford a repeat." "And since I specifically told you, you can't fire me," he cut in. The other crew lead had just returned and overheard. "Pretty sure he can," he said calmly. "And if he doesn't, I will." Darren puffed up. "Let's go talk to the boss right now." It was 4 in the afternoon. My dad lived 3 hours away. I shrugged. Fine. We drove straight there. We interrupted my family's dinner, walked into my dad's home office, and Darren sat on the couch with a smug look like he was about to win a lawsuit on daytime TV. My dad listened to the whole story without interrupting. When I finished, he turned to Darren. "You cost this company over $100,000, my dad said, voice rising. "You ignored a direct safety correction from your crew lead. You risked lives. Do you have any idea what that does to our insurance, to our contract?" Darren waved a hand toward me. "What the F does he know? He's just a kid." My dad stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. "I taught him how to rig a winch when he was 8 years old," he roared, "and he did it right. You're a 40-year-old man who managed to crush an entire truck because your ego couldn't handle being corrected?" He pointed at the door. "You're fired, and I'm exploring a civil claim for negligence. Get out of my house." Darren left without another word. The contract survived. Insurance covered part of the loss. We ate the deductible and learned an expensive lesson about hiring based on resumes instead of attitude. As for me, I kept climbing towers, and every time I rig a winch, I double-check the pin, because I'd rather be called a bootlicker than watch another antenna fall out of the sky. 3 different flavors of entitlement, 3 different reasons they thought they could get away with it. The stepmother operated on ownership by proximity. She lived in the house, so she felt it was hers. She kept the TV, the photos, the memories, things that had nothing to do with her, because she could. 28 years later, her daughter tried the same logic with the insurance money, but the policy had OP's husband's father's name on it too. Proximity isn't ownership. The house is now a wreck, but it's finally his. In story 2, they knew the deposit existed, so they engineered an end run around it. Call for 12, show up with 25, switch seats, demand synchronization, tip nothing. They treated servers like obstacles rather than people. The second night with the deposit paid, they behaved. That's not a mystery, that's just the difference between consequences and the lack of them. Story 3, the new hire operated on contempt disguised as credentials. He had a degree, so he assumed he knew more than a 20-year-old crew lead. He ignored a safety warning because taking direction from the boss's kid wounded his pride. $100,000 in damage later, he was still arguing. He drove 3 hours to complain to OP's father, convinced the real boss would side with him. He was wrong. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.